Well, I think I have to explain why I've been quoting from odd sources lately, because you probably came here to listen to someone who studied Buddhism and the Chinese Book of Change for decades. But so here's the story. Long story short, I read the King James version of the Bible when I was young. It was almost mandatory if you wanted to read Nietzsche. And that was the beginning of I guess, my foray into philosophy in no small part. I found a copy of the Genealogy of Morals and the Birth of Tragedy at a used bookstore when I was just a little gaffer. And it was broken, right? Spine completely broken right in half. So I got it for a song, right? Because I didn't know if I was going to like it. At the day, I think I was looking at Francis of Assisi and Nietzsche and some other stuff. And Nietzsche spoke to me, this idea of the genealogy of morals and the birth of tragedy, right? Remember my history as I am actually looking to solve this tragedy of trauma. So fast forward to me reading, finally, the genealogy of morals and the birth of tragedy, fell in love with this author, with this philosopher, and went to the bookstore. Northern Ontario, not a great choice. Not a lot of choices to where you're going to get your books, or in this case, choice in books. All they had was a copy of a Penguins Classics. Luckily, the translation was R.J. Hollingdale, which I'm having a hard time finding right now, a good translation, a good copy of Thus Spake Zarathustra by Nietzsche, translated by R.J. Hollingdale. I lucked out because, as they say, R.J. Hollingdale repaired the mistakes that Kaufman made, a decade earlier or a few years earlier, don't quote me, as well as some good notes. And those notes are most important because I am going to do my own translation of Thus Spake Zarathustra, because I've said this before, it's the greatest self-help book that can be utilized because it allows you to create for yourself a transvaluation of all values, as long as it is in synergy with the I and thou, taking these things into account, because you got to read the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and Greek and probably Hebrew, certainly the Bible and French. There's so much you got to read Nietzsche. So believe it or not, I had no problem reading Nietzsche and then later even Carl Jung. I've read everything that Nietzsche pretty much has written. I mean, there's stuff probably in the Nietzsche library that I wouldn't have access to, and not all of his journals. I did a lot of searching through them. But I was fine having read the King James and with what I would call a facial understanding of the Bible. It's a joke. It's a reference to that number 624, right? That God shared his face with us. And this idea in Hebrew, face means what's on the inside. Your face reflects your inside, as opposed to facially means you only learn the basics, right? And in fact, just to give you an insight, somebody on Discord, we were talking about philosophy, and they said they were an absurdist. So I was chuffed because you know me, I love Camus. So I asked if he's read Camus, and he's like, no, well, why would I need to read Camus? And I'm like, what? And another one's like, yeah, you're not a real absurdist unless you list all of the different philosophers that were absurdists. There was one, Camus. That's why I asked. But even better, the individual, someone else in the chat room pipes up and goes, well, you don't need to read the book to know what someone said. He's not wrong, I guess, because students for the last 20 years have been just given quotes out of context. And no, that hasn't been a problem at all. Not at all. So there's where the problem comes in with Nietzsche. I'm going to start by sharing his Hinterwelten, his afterworldsman, his backworldsman, his afterworldly. Depending on the translation, they're all wrong. Because what Nietzsche meant, as he does over and over again, he took the German word Hinterwelten, which means the back or behind or after world, or you know what I mean? We use it in English, hinterland. It's the area between different, between a scrubland and a forest, say, for example, the hinterland. But he meant it differently. Same as his ressentiment. Yes, it's a French word, but he meant it differently. Same as Schatzen. Yes, it means treasure. But he was trying to explain that what we treasure is what we decide we value and likely create, right? So there's your meaning through, as Dante's Inferno teaches us. The way out is through. That's Nietzsche's Amor Fati. His eternal return is just accepting everything as ordered and going through, using it to make you stronger, that which does not kill me, right? So here we sit, right? Here we sit. Everything's fine. Love my Nietzsche. But then I have been looking for more Northrop Frye. I've talked to you about Northrop Frye because this is how it goes full circle. I was actually put into a general program in school because I was put in early French immersion. So I spoke English and French fluently. But because of my dyslexia, I actually presented as, not the most, not the sharpest tool in the shed. So I got put back. But when they realized their mistake, and actually it was funny because it was a Spanish teacher teaching French who thought she could get me kicked off of the football team because my French marks were bad, but she just got busted for having given me bad marks because she didn't like my friend who embarrassed her. And she just ended up getting embarrassed herself because when she got brought up to the vice principal, she thought she was getting me in trouble. It was actually about her getting in trouble, and then she had to apologize to me because the principals even told her, I don't know if you realize this, but this young man probably speaks more French than you do, right? So, needless to say, I didn't get cut off the football team. And because of this, they allowed me to go back into the advanced school program. But what they said is they wouldn't allow me to just join any class I wanted. So here was this class that I really wanted to be a part of. First, I had to show I could pass English. So I took an American Lit class and a regular. I wanted to take the actual university prep English because I was so behind. I really needed help. I hit grade 10 in high school. I still spoke with a French accent. It's really quite funny. So I had this teacher that I wanted to learn from because, as the story goes, this was the 90s. And she was very well known because she was a PhD teaching high school college prep course. But she was a student of a very famous Canadian by the name of Northrop Frye. So you can imagine how cool this was to be her student. So I had to ask her to let me in her class. And just as it happened, I'd been reading that book that I picked up at the Coles bookstore that I mentioned, Thus Spake Zarathustra, the translation by R.J. Hollingdale of Friedrich Nietzsche's his greatest tome, his œuvre d'art, as it were, his work of art. And so she grilled me. Now, keep in mind, at the time, I had no idea that this was something that, edgy teenagers might read, or, somebody who is verboten, right? I had no idea. I just picked it up at the store. Nobody told me anything about it. I had been spending the last year probably trying to read it all. Certainly, it was perfect because it's a bunch of fairly short little chapters. It allows you to go through and understand them. And in fact, the way Nietzsche writes, you can just go line by line, paragraph by paragraph, and learn it that way. But I guess I answered the questions properly because she let me in. So, but here's where it gets funny. Because she was Northrop Frye's student, she was a big fan of Northrop Frye. So she ended up teaching essentially from what was Northrop Frye's lesser known work, the Educated Imagination, which I highly recommend. It's wonderful. I'd recommend The Educated Imagination, which is what began this journey of me, and it took decades, how to learn as an incredibly severely dyslexic individual who was never taught. I just assumed that I would be unable to read and unable to learn the way regular people do, that it's normal for me to take a year or more to read a book that some people might be able to read in a day. But this teacher let me in, and she made me part of the class. And the educated imagination really resonated for me. And so I wanted to learn. And then so being of a military family, my first area of understanding was military, right? So Sun Tzu's The Art of War, Clausewitz on War, these are the sorts of things that I looked at. So for this class, it had to be something closer to literature. So the happy medium I found was Rudyard Kipling. But me, I avoided what most people would think, right? What would be Kim or The Jungle Book or I mean, I guess we could have even done just so stories, right? Even though it's for kids, it's closer to literature. But I chose his poetry, right? Danny Deever and Tommy Atkins. And most importantly, right? If you can keep your head about you and all those, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs, if you can make when half of your, I can't remember the quotes. Don't bust my nuts. That's the big thing that I've learned. Don't waste a lot of time memorizing quotes. Spend your time understanding what the book is meant to teach you. And I think that's what got me into her class, is because I really understood what Nietzsche was getting at. Because Nietzsche was not a negative to me, certainly not Zarathustra. In fact, I thought it was a book that gave me great hope, and it really did resonate and gave me a sense of meaning, right? Outside of religion, outside of something given to you, I was alone and figuring this out on my own. So obviously, as a Pacheka Buddha path follower, right, a solo Buddha practitioner, I mean, that resonated for me. But it wasn't till fast forward 20, 30 years after that right, I'd even was able, like I said, to read Jung in his Red Book with my level of understanding of the Bible and literature. Right, I've talked to you before that I had to go and read, say John Donne, some of these different authors, Dante. And I'm glad I did, because it was actually in Dante's Paradiso that I got some of my favorite new lines, right? I've said this before, that my favorite always was Inferno, um, maybe even Purgatorio. I thought I preferred that when I was young, but now I realize it was just me when I was young. Paradiso has some really, really, really um, pithy lines, right? I think there's more gravitas to be found within Paradiso. And yet most people listen to Inferno. Sadly, it happens to be so long too, you don't even have to spend that much time. But so fast forward to today, I told you I'd read Fearful Symmetry by Northrop Frye. That's an opening of William Blake. Right. And then accidentally I came across Northrop Frye's book, The Great Code, which it was an attempt to make people understand that literature, as I've said before, as language, is heavily based on myth and story and archetypes, so however you want to call it. But certainly in the West, it's the Bible. In the East, right? In India, the Gita, the Upanishads, the Mahabharata, you name it. In China, it'd be the Qing. In Japan, Confucius, Lao Tzu, the I Ching. It's a mix, right? So Northrop Frye made us realize that there's not just Hemingway, right? His titles, The Sun Also Rises, ripped directly from Ecclesiastes. But more importantly, what I've come to realize is one of my favorite quotes for Nietzsche for years was, man would be a god if not for his base instincts, right? And I always quoted it as, if not for his belly, for his gut. And you know what's crazy is that's literally where Nietzsche got that phrase from. It's actually in the Bible, where it talks about men and their fruits of their labor go only to satisfy their stomachs, right? How short-sighted are we? And understanding that passage from the Bible makes you understand Nietzsche even better. So here I am trying to read The Great Code, assuming that I would be able to read Northrop Frye's book and he would just explain to me how, a lot of this poetry is allusions to, literature, and in no small part, that's the Bible. But no, As I began to read Northrop Frye's The Great Code, I realized how little I really did understand about the Bible. And trust me, if you're annoyed with some of the stuff I've talked about in the last couple months, it's nothing compared to how annoyed my poor wife is, who's had to listen to this for probably a year because of the amount of research that it's required. Because I really am trying to get past all of the propaganda, get past all of the hyperbole and the rhetoric, and truly understand what's being said. Right? So here we are. Right? As the outsider, this is the funniest thing. This outsider's perspective, I had no idea how important it is, but it is, right? Because when I read the Gita or the Dhammapada or the I Ching, I wasn't reading it as a religious document or a document with a bunch of baggage. I was reading it with an open mind, as I did the Bible. And what did it do? It opened up for me not just the literature that I love, but it opened up the book of literature that we call the Bible. And the beauty of it is you don't have to believe like the Vedantins say, but as St. John of the Cross said, these things are not understood when they're sought. They're not understood when you read it facially. They're only understood when you live it, when you practice it. So not even analytical reading can make you understand a philosophy. That is something that requires practice and most of all faith. And that doesn't mean blind belief. It means trust, right? Following your path that you may know might not be true, but you know it to not be a lie.